So, welcome back to my channel. Hello if you are new, and thank you ever so much if you're tuning in again. I hope all of us have had a really great month. I know I'm a little bit sort of late on the sort of draw with February's favourites, but things have been very busy recently. So I'm going to kick this video off with the absolutely fantastic album that is The Ruins of Beverast and the Thule Grimoires. Now, I will totally hold my hands up here. I had no idea that this band even existed before this album dropped into my inbox. But ever since it has, it's not stopped playing. I really enjoy it. I think there's so much that you can kind of hear on this album. There's a lot of like post-punk influence, there's black metal influence, there's even sampling of Sir David Attenborough. It's another fantastic release from Van Records, who are kind of really starting to be on my radar now. And there just doesn't really seem to be anything like it out there. And at times I kind of thought it was a little bit sort of a bit of a hard thing to get through. But then the more I listened to it, the more I kind of really got into the groove of what the Ruins of Beverast are like. You can't get more prog rock for me than having an album that was originally going to be one piece and that ends up being split into two because you've decided to change things around so much that it essentially becomes two different releases. So that's what Transatlantic have done with their album The Absolute Universe. You've got The Absolute Universe Forevermore, which is kind of like the longer, more progressive, and then you've got The Absolute Universe The Breath of Life, which is kind of like an abridged version. But the secret with this is that both of them are very different, and they do have, you know, like different melodies, different things like that, so they are actually separate albums. And this one definitely gives me those sort of vibes that I had with The Whirlwind, for example, but has that sort of accessibility of Kaleidoscope as well. And, you know, being a huge Mike Portnoy fan, it's really great to hear, you know, him back on the drums as well. And I think it's just a really solid release all around.
Ready to ride for the tribe.
So the band are a kind of fantastic combination of post-rock, prog, and I would say sort of doom. There was a lot of stuff that reminded me of ISIS on this album, but they very much have their own sort of niche. It definitely will appeal to fans of like Yob, and definitely has a quite psychedelic feel to it, and that's probably down to the fact that the band have this shamanic vision. It's a really esoteric album, and it was all recorded live as well, which I thought was very interesting. And I think this is really going to be a big surprise of 2021, so you definitely shouldn't sleep on this album. Fantastic record. So this is perhaps one of the most, I would say, hotly anticipated albums in the sort of black metal circles. The best way I can kind of describe this is it's very emotional, atmospheric, long drawn out post-black metal, let's say. And in some ways that's really good. And it takes, you know, like takes you on a journey and has these sort of atmospheric ideas. But then in others, it does kind of drag on a little bit. But the thing is that they have this amazing contrast between the cleans and then the more kind of aggressive sections. But it does kind of really feel quite seamless. And the reason I'm putting it in my favourites, despite it being kind of a bit long, is that I think that there's some really great songwriting on here. And, you know, it kind of outweighs the negative aspects of it being slightly longer. From what I could kind of tell on this album is that the themes are very much around the idea of rebirth, you know, that kind of like samsara idea. It's that concept of the beginning and the end, you know, alpha, omega. Most importantly, though, it's a very solid symphonic metal album, and I think it's definitely a calling card to the band kind of reaching that sort of next level. And truth be told, I feel like I'm a sucker for Nightwish, but I have never really been a massive fan of Epica. But that's definitely changed now, and I think this album is really interesting and definitely worth a look in. But of course, it wouldn't be one of my favourite videos without some death metal. It's very straight up death metal, but I like the fact that it has an old school approach. And I just really enjoyed the kind of sort of grooves on this album, to be fair. And that's kind of what separated it from the kind of normal death metal pack. You know, if you're kind of a fan of tremolo picking and the classic sort of death metal stomp, then I reckon you'll very much enjoy this. But at the same time, it has that old school soul, but is very new school. And I think that these guys will be probably making waves quite a lot now that this album has been released. This is the band's 13th studio album, and they've almost been together for 30 years. And I remember an amazing interview I did years and years ago with the drummer from Moonspell, and he was talking about this idea of fado. And fado is basically a Portuguese, it's like a very sad, melancholic sound that the Portuguese have. And I think it's primarily to do with acoustic guitars and things like that. So Moonspell is kind of like their version of metal fado. And I think you can really you can hear that here. There's definitely a classic gothic metal sound. This is quite an atmospheric release as well, and thematically, apparently this is kind of where Moonspell are kind of turning their back on modernity and things like that, which I kind of think is pretty cool. Really embracing their roots and just going back to the basics of what Moonspell is about. And it really surprised me. So definitely give that one a listen. So one of my favourite things about Loathe, right, is particularly on I Let It In and It Took Everything, is the soundscapes. And I didn't have any idea that this was coming, but this is basically a completely instrumental album from Loathe. It's also kind of a result of the lockdown, and it's nice to see that the band is still being creative. I think they've got a track which is like the year when everything happened but nothing happened, something like that. And it's very much that sort of distillation of what Loathe's sort of more experimental sound is like. At points, it almost sounds a little bit like Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd-y, but I really liked it. And I'm a sucker for Ulrich Schnauz, Tangerine Dream, that sort of thing. So this kind of really scratched that itch. Humanity's Last Breath are a Swedish band, and they very much have quite like a dark sound. It's very sort of bleak, I think is the right word. And it kind of combines this sort of bleakness with a technicality, but also I think would, appeal to fans of like Thy Art Is Murder, Car Bomb, that sort of like very riff heavy and breakdown heavy sort of style. But what I like about them is that they do something slightly different, and it is that sort of sterile feel that I thought was interesting, and it really kind of highlights the Mariusz Lewandowski artwork, I think. And finally we come to Jotun with Access All Worlds. So this is kind of almost like a combination of prog rock meets black metal with some symphonic elements. It's really quite unique, I would say. That it has that soul of prog rock and really does sort of have a big concept. The concept is the idea of these beings which are exploring the reasons for the apocalypse. So, nice and easy stuff. It's just got a lot of different things going on. There's some Blind Guardian style moments like power metal, but then there's also symphonic. There's some amazing guitar solos on here as well. But then a lot of, different kind of vocal tonalities. They've got the singer from Hamford on, who's in the band, and his range is amazing. You know, he's able to kind of like bellow, but also kind of go really, really high and adds that sort of level of theatricality to it. So that's it from me for this month. I would love to hear what you guys have been enjoying this month. Let me know in the comments down below. Keep your eyes peeled for my Metallica Master of Puppets 35th anniversary celebration, which will be going up this week. And I'll see you next month for my favourites, and I'll see you next week for my next album review. Take care, my friends.